Hey everybody, welcome back to Web Inspector. I am Timothy Miller, your host, and it's Minutiae Monday, which means we are going to learn a small detail about web development that just might make a big difference. So today we're going to talk about Git a little bit. The thing about Git is it's really hard to get into at the start, at least it was for me. It was difficult to wrap my brain around what it was doing, and it feels very obscure sometimes. Sometimes it's very difficult to tell what's going on behind the scenes, and I feel like it makes it difficult for people to get into. There are some other options if you don't want to use the command line. There are things like source tree, which is right here. You can look at source tree, and source tree, I've used source tree quite a bit, and it works most of the time, but I've also spent a lot of time trying to figure out why source tree doesn't work. I've had a lot of times where I have helped someone who uses source tree exclusively and doesn't know how to use the command line stuff, and I would end up just going to the command line and running my commands there to do what I wanted it to do, and it would work. And for some reason it wouldn't work in source tree, but it would work in the command line. And if you learn how to do just a few simple things in command line, it will make things a lot easier. It'll save you a lot of time and frustration. And there are a few ways that you can make this easier for yourself too. And that's one of the things I want to talk about today. So I have nothing against GUIs for Git. You can use them. The thing is, Git is a very complicated system, and sometimes it's hard to see what's happening behind the scenes in a GUI because of that complexity. So sometimes it's useful to just use the terminal. But the problem with using the terminal for Git for me is I have difficulty remembering all of the different commands that you have to use. I understand the basic concepts behind Git, but the commands themselves are a little more obscure for me. I used to have a cheat sheet that I would open up to show myself, here are the basic things that you need to use with Git, so I could copy paste the commands over or retype them or whatever. But it's kind of a hassle. I didn't like having that cheat sheet sitting on my desktop all the time. I wanted to just know this stuff. So a way that I've found to make it easier is to create your own custom Git aliases. And I want to show you the aliases that I use every day now, and hopefully it'll inspire you to be able to use this command line stuff a little bit more easily, to be able to build and customize your own system. It's not as intimidating as it sounds. So let's just jump into it. Let me pull source tree back up for a minute here. So if you've used Git at all, you know that there are a few basic functions that you have to use when you're using Git. One of them is this commit function, which you can see very clearly here in source tree. You can commit changes to your code. I have nothing to commit here right now, but that is one thing that is just the core of what Git is. After you commit your code, you can pull and you can push, and those are also important because that's how you share your code to the world. And those are the basic concepts that you need to understand to make Git work. Everything else is kind of fluff. Everything else is optional, but everything else is helpful. If you understand those two things, committing and pushing and pulling, then you can use that knowledge to help you as you jump into the command line. So let me pull up my config file. I can't actually quite remember how Git wants me to do that. So whenever I can't remember a Git command, all I have to remember is that there's a way to find whatever I'm looking for. So if I type Git, I know there's a config command for Git, and I'll type -h to give me the help information for that config command. And then I'm just going to scroll up. I'm looking for an editor or edit. So there's -e, open in an editor. So that's what I'm looking for. So if I do git config -e, it'll tell me I'm not in a Git directory because it's looking for a local config file. So I also need to tell it that I want to open the global config file. There's a global flag right here. So let's do git config global e. And here's my global config file. We're going to just walk through these aliases a little bit. I'm going to explain why I use each of these and what they're useful for. So I'm hoping you can take some of these commands and put them into your own alias file. Maybe that will teach you a few things about Git that you didn't know. Maybe they will be useful for you. I don't know, but hopefully this will help make Git a little less intimidating for you. It certainly does for me. Command number one is pretty simple. It's just status, basically. I got tired of typing status every time, so I do git st. These two flags just make it look a little bit nicer. It makes it more condensed for me, it gives me all the information I need in a smaller form factor. So let me show you what that looks like. If we come over here to this other command line, if I type git status, it gives me a lot of pretty information. But I have seen this enough times that I don't really need all of that information. So when I type my command, it just tells me what I need to know, which is, are there any changes in my repository right now? Right now, there are no changes here. So simple as that. The next command here is probably one of my most frequently used commands. It's CAM, which stands for commit, add, and message. I tend to do this a lot where I just add all of the files and commit them at the same time. I like to keep my commits rather small, so I'll just commit things one at a time as I write them, and I just like to type the message in the terminal. For this, we do git cam, and then you do -m, and you can type your message just like that. So it just makes it a little bit shorter, makes it a little bit easier to remember exactly what to do. So I like that one. Speeds me up. Next, and this is actually one of my favorites because it adds a little humor for me, because a lot of times when I run this git cam command, this -a flag doesn't actually add untracked files. And honestly, I don't really understand how to use untracked files. Everything I put in the repository pretty much always just goes into the repository, so I rarely actually want to keep files untracked for long. So a lot of times I will run this cam command and then realize that there was an untracked file that wasn't added into that commit. So in that situation, I will run git oops, which allows me to amend my last commit and allows me to fix that problem. So it's just commit -- amend, but I was having trouble remembering that, so I created git oops, which does it for me. Next is CO, which is to check out a branch. It's just a lot easier to type CO than check out. BR is the same, branch, super easy, super simple. Unstash, I was having trouble remembering stash pop, and you're gonna hear a common theme here, guys, where it was just command that I was having trouble remembering, and there was a way that I could remember it better. And in this case, it was unstash, because I would stash changes, and then I was like, okay, I'm ready to unstash these changes, and unstash didn't work. So stash pop just didn't make as much sense to my brain. Even as a JavaScripter, where pop should make sense, because that's a JavaScript function, but it didn't make sense to me. Unstash made more sense, so I created this alias. Next is update. A lot of times when I'm working on a branch in a project, someone will merge something into master, and I always want my branch to be up to date with master. So I'll just run update. It'll merge the master branch into my branch. And how many is kind of a fun command that I added because I was curious to see how many commits were in each repository that I worked on. So how many is it just adds up all of the commits in the current repository and counts them. So I can show you what that looks like. How many? And it tells me there are 6 commits. This is a pretty new repository, so there are only 6. Only 6 commits, but this works on a repository of any size. I've worked on repositories with tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of commits, and it's always just kind of fun to run that every once in a while and see how it grows, especially when you've got a big team and that number grows really fast. After how many, we have rdelete, which is just a way for me to remember how to delete a branch on the remote origin. A lot of times I could remember how to delete a branch locally. It was easier that way, but removing it from a remote repository was harder for me to remember. And it was actually so hard for me to remember that I forgot that I had this rdelete function, and I created another one called rdel, which is the same thing essentially. It looks slightly different, but it's doing the same thing. So down here I have rdel and ldel, which is locally delete and remote delete. And when I'm done with the branch, I'll merge it into master, and then I'll run both of those commands, and that branch is gone. Last but not least, I have git logs, which is basically like git log, except it's more concise. I've used git long enough that I like to have things concise and condensed, so I can just see the information that I'm looking for. So git logs, let me show that to you. Git logs is very basic. It just shows me the description and the first part of the file hash. And a lot of times that's all I need, because I'm just looking for a certain commit that I made. So I'll just scan through these, copy this, and then I can check out that commit. So guys, there are a few aliases that I personally use. I know there are lots of people out there who do way smarter things than I do, but this is a good way to kind of dip your feet in, get you going on this. And remember that when you're looking for anything in Git or you're confused about anything, remember that .h or that -h flag that you can run to ask for help on anything. If you're confused trying to figure out what anything does, just run git, whatever command -h, and it will give you this really great help file that will just essentially walk you through whatever you need to know. Obviously, Google is also a really good friend, or DuckDuckGo, or whatever search engine you use. Git really is a tremendous tool. I feel like it's one of the most valuable contributions programmers have ever made to the human race, which is a huge statement, I know, but it's just such a wonderful thing in so many different contexts. So whatever you can do to speed yourself up and to make this tool more useful for you, do it. And I would say learning to run the basic commands in terminal and getting you away from the crutch of GUIs is one of the best things you can do for your future as a programmer. So don't be afraid to get your feet dirty. Remember that you can undo anything that you ever do in Git, almost anything, and just, dive in, go crazy, learn lots of stuff. And remember, guys, you can do this. You too can be a programmer, and just never stop learning. Bye.